There's a number of considerations for employers during this period of unrest. The first one should be in relation to safety, employee safety. So employers in Hong Kong have an obligation to ensure a safe workplace for their employees, and that means coming into and exiting the building as well. So where there is any kind of protest that might turn volatile, then employers should be thinking about what arrangements they would have in place to ensure the safety of their employees. And that could mean asking them to work from home, if that's a possibility, asking them not to come in, if it's not a possibility, which is the case with some industries such as F&B and retail and hospitality, very difficult for those individuals to work from home. So in that situation, you might ask them just not to come in. Or if they're already in the workplace, you need to make sure they have the possibility to leave as quickly as possible to ensure they get home and they're safe. So businesses should have in place business contingency plans that they then implement in these circumstances. If they don't, for whatever reason, an employee is injured, even if that's on the way into work or exiting work, then that individual could bring a claim against the employer, and there could be compensation that needs to be paid in the circumstances. So that's the first thing to think about, and that's employee safety, which I think is paramount in a lot of employers' minds. The second thing to think about is what do employers do where employees want to take time off to protest or to strike. Now, this has been happening in a variety of ways. Employees have been applying for annual leave to go on the protest or to strike. And if they've done that in accordance with the employer's rules and they've done it in good time, they've been granted the leave, then the employees can do whatever they want during their time off, as long as their actions don't do anything that will bring the company into disrepute or would affect the employee's ability to carry out their duties going forward. So these kind of activities might be illegal assembly, rioting, criminal damage, assaulting a police officer, or misusing personal data of those people participating or in the protests themselves, or the police officers. If they do any of those things, then the employer can take action against that individual, even if they've taken time off to do the strike or protest or whatever the activity is. So there could be disciplinary consequences for that. Other situations are where employees take sick leave to go on the strike. Now, when it comes to sick leave, employees should only use sick leave if they're genuinely sick or they're injured. So if they're using it to get short notice time off to strike or to protest, then that would be a misuse of the company policy, and the employer would be entitled, therefore, to take action against that individual. And that would be disciplinary action up to possibly dismissal. Now, some employees just simply didn't turn up to work during the citywide strike, believing they had a constitutional right to strike. Now, this is somewhat more complicated because under Article 27 of the Basic Law, there is a part of it which says there is a right to form trade unions and to strike. And some people saw this as a constitutional right, just as to strike no matter what, unfettered right. That's not the case, unfortunately. Under the Employment Ordinance, there is some protection for individuals that are trade union members or officers where they take part in trade union activities, and they do so in accordance with the rules under the Employment Ordinance, so they have to have consent from the employer to take part in these activities during working hours. And when it comes to the definition of striking, this is quite clearly defined in the Trade Union Ordinance, and it's to do with where there's a dispute. So employees wanting to bring a dispute against their employer. And if that's not the case, if it's just a strike for political purposes, then that is not protected under the Employment Ordinance at all. So those individuals that went off and took the time off, believing they were striking and they were protected, were not, unless they were trade union members and they were taking part in a trade union dispute. So they could face disciplinary consequences as well. There were some employers that just simply gave the day off to their employees if they wanted to take part in protests or strikes. And in that situation, if it's consented to, then there shouldn't be a problem. And I think another thing to think about for employers is what happens if the employee gets arrested during any of these protests or strike. Now, what action can they take, should they take in the circumstances? And now we would recommend that you don't, as an employer, take a knee-jerk reaction to this and simply dismiss them. There is some investigation to be done there. And there's some very high thresholds when it comes to summarily dismissing an employee in Hong Kong. You've got to work out what the allegation is, investigate it properly, and then decide whether you think they actually did the act and it constitutes misconduct under your rules. And I think the final thing to think about is the impact on revenues and the economy when it comes to the protest. The retail sector has been hit pretty hard. they have been reporting single to double-digit reductions in their revenues. And if that continues, then they might need to think about a reduction in staff. So we might start to see some redundancies happening in the workplace when it comes to the sectors such as F&B, retail, hospitality. So there hasn't been, we don't think, an immediate impact on recruitment necessarily. Speaking to law firms and professional services firms, they are still recruiting, they're still growing. They're hoping that this period of unrest is of a limited period and that Hong Kong will bounce back. There has, as I said, been an immediate impact on the retail sector, F&B, hospitality. So we might see some impact there. But what we're actually hearing is that candidates and those people who are considering a move, whether they're in Hong Kong or they're outside Hong Kong thinking about coming in, they're the ones that are taking quite a cautious approach now and thinking, is it the right time to actually be moving roles? Is the role that I'm looking at going to be there in the next few months if this continues, if we continue to have the impact of the protests on the economy? And those people that were considering moving over to Asia from the UK, Australia, the US, and now, anecdotally, we hear thinking about Singapore as an alternative option rather than coming to Hong Kong. The Civil Service Code, the rules, say that anyone that works within the civil service has to remain politically neutral and loyally serve the chief executive. So that's been interpreted as that they shouldn't be participating in any kind of rallies or protests. But there's equally some information on the civil service website saying that people are allowed to have their political opinion as long as they do so in their own free time. So it's thought that if you're participating in a protest on your day off and you're doing so as a resident of Hong Kong, that should not necessarily impact your ability to carry out your role as a civil servant. That said, obviously, the message from the government, from the civil service, has been to ensure that that the civil servants don't come out and make any political messages, and they've said that it will be seriously treated if they are seen to be participating in these rallies and taking a political position, because that may impact the perception on their ability to carry out their roles impartially and properly.